Everyone knows the Grateful Dead's dancing bears. They're on t-shirts, bumper stickers, license plates, golf balls. Maybe you love them, maybe you hate them, but they're everywhere. But here's the thing nobody tells you. They're not dancing, they're marching. And the man who insisted on that distinction, the man these bears actually represent, might be the most important person in the Grateful Dead's history who wasn't in the band. His name was Owsley Stanley, but everyone called him Bear. If you've ever wondered where the Grateful Dead's dancing bears actually came from, the answer isn't what you think. It's about a man who revolutionized live music, preserved performances that would have been lost forever, and built sound systems so advanced that modern concert technology still uses his ideas. A perfectionist who approached rock and roll with the precision of a scientist. And then he died in a car accident in Australia in 2011, largely forgotten by the mainstream world he helped create. The Bears first appeared in July of 1973, on the back cover of an album called History of the Grateful Dead Volume 1. Most people know it by its subtitle, Bear's Choice. Artist Bob Thomas drew them, a row of brightly colored bears high-stepping around the album's border in military formation, marching. Owsley's son, Starfinder Stanley, has spent years correcting people about this. Quote, Bear would correct you and tell you that they're not actually dancing, they're marching. To most people, it's a minor distinction. To Bear, it was everything, because everything about Owsley Stanley was about precision, about getting things exactly right. And understanding that obsession helps you understand how one man, working mostly behind the scenes, changed the course of rock and roll. Augustus Owsley Stanley III was born on January 19, 1935 in Kentucky. He dropped the Augustus early and picked up the nickname Bear, reportedly because of his hairy chest and his love of dancing at shows. Dancing, ironically. In 1965, he met the Grateful Dead at the acid tests, those legendary gatherings where the boundaries between audience and performer dissolved. Bear became their patron, declining any official management role but volunteering as their sound man. He had money from his other ventures, and he poured it into the band. Equipment, food, housing, whatever they needed to keep experimenting. But Bear wasn't just funding the Grateful Dead, he was documenting them. In March of Native 66, Owsley began what he called his sonic journals. He recorded hundreds of Grateful Dead shows and essentially every artist that played through a system he built. Rock, blues, jazz, country, even classical music. Many of these recordings are the only ones that exist. Now, you might think recording concerts sounds simple. Set up some microphones, hit record, done. But Bear approached it like a scientist. He refused to use equalization on his microphones. Instead of adjusting frequencies electronically, he would physically reposition the microphones until he captured what he called a picture of the stage. He developed something called constructive leakage technique. That's when microphone bleed, usually considered a problem, actually creates a more coherent stereo mix. He was creating art through engineering. After every show, Bear would do something that drove the band absolutely crazy. He'd make them listen to the tape immediately, right then, while they were exhausted and wanted to unwind. And he'd ask them a question. This is what the audience got. Is this what you were trying to give them? It was Bear's way of closing the loop between intention and reality. Most bands never heard what their audience heard. Bear made the Grateful Dead confront it every single night. On June 28, 1969, the Dead played the Sonoma County Fairgrounds in Santa Rosa, California. It was a benefit show with guest musicians Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane, plus drummer Joey Covington. They performed a song called Slewfoot, a Porter Wagoner cover about, appropriately enough, a bear. Bear's tape captured everything with immaculate soundboard quality. That recording later became part of a Sonic Journals release called Before We Were Them. But the show that really demonstrated Bear's vision happened 7 months later, February 13, 1970, at the Fillmore East in New York. A 4-set marathon that pushed the boundaries of what a rock show could be. An early show, then a late show split into 3 parts. Electric, acoustic, electric. The late show's 3rd set featured an epic 40-plus minute sequence, Dark Star melting into cryptical envelopment, which framed That's It for the other one, back through cryptical, and finally into Turn On Your Love Light. The famous sandwich structure. One reviewer wrote, quote, widely considered one of the greatest shows of all time. Each song has been voted the best version, and Bear recorded all of it. Without his Sonic Journals, that performance would exist only in fading memories. Instead, it's been released officially, shared endlessly, studied by musicians trying to understand how the Dead achieved that level of improvisation. Bear's obsession with documentation preserved not just performances, but an entire approach to music making. But Bear wasn't satisfied with just recording the Dead. He wanted to change how they sounded live. For years, he'd been experimenting with PA systems, trying to solve a fundamental problem. In most concert setups, the band hears a completely different mix than the audience. They're relying on stage monitors that can't keep up with the main speakers, so they're essentially playing blind, making decisions based on incomplete information. Bear thought that was insane. His solution was radical. On March 23, 1974, at the Cow Palace in Daly City, California, the Grateful Dead unveiled the Wall of Sound. 604 speakers, 26,400 watts of power. Every instrument had its own channel and dedicated speakers. The vocalists sang directly into the main PA system, not through separate monitors. For the first time, the band heard exactly what the audience heard. Sound engineer Dan Healy later said the Wall of Sound was a turning point in sound reinforcement. After that, the entire industry had to rethink PA design. Modern line array systems, dedicated submixes, in-ear monitors. All of them trace their DNA back to Bear's obsession with sonic purity. But here's the thing about perfectionism. It's expensive. The Wall of Sound required multiple tractor trailers to transport. It took hours to set up and tear down, and some of the vocals were still faint. An irony Bear never quite solved. The system eventually proved too impractical, but the ideas behind it never went away. Now, back to those bears and their deeper meaning. Artist Bob Thomas was close friends with Owsley and knew that Bear loved ballet, loved the precision of trained movement. So when Thomas designed the bears for Bear's choice, he made them march with purpose. Not the loose, carefree dancing of hippie culture, military precision. It was a visual representation of Bear's philosophy, freedom through discipline. But there's another layer most people don't know. The Bear images were derived from a 36-point lead printing slug, a piece of metal type used in old printing presses. Some sources suggest that same slug had been used for blotter art, so the bears connected back to Bear's earlier work, the thing that funded everything. It was all one continuous story. The financing, the sound engineering, the visual iconography, all flowing from one man's uncompromising vision. Owsley's former partner, Ronnie Stanley, described his approach in a Deadcast interview. Bear insisted on natural materials only. At Renaissance fairs, no plastic beads, only silk. He taught her to value her own work highly enough to charge what it was worth. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing right, even if that means building everything yourself. After the Grateful Dead's touring years, Bear moved to Australia. He built an off-grid homestead, designed electronics, roasted coffee. He never stopped creating, never stopped pushing for perfection. And on March 12, 2011, Owsley Stanley died in a car accident. He was 76 years old. The people who knew what he'd really accomplished, the engineers and archivists and musicians, mourned something bigger than headlines could capture. They mourned the loss of a mind that refused to accept good enough. Today, the Owsley Stanley Foundation, run by his son, Starfinder, and archivist Hawk Semins, preserves and releases the sonic journals. Hundreds of hours spanning the full spectrum of American music. Motown, bluegrass, psychedelic rock, all captured with Bear's meticulous attention to detail. Each release is mastered from Bear's original tapes, and those bears are still everywhere. Most people have no idea they represent a man named Bear. Most people still think they're dancing. But now you know the truth. You know they came from a lead printing slug, drawn by Bob Thomas for an album that memorialized Bear's sonic vision. You know that Bear built the Wall of Sound, recorded thousands of hours of performances, and changed how live music works. And you know that when you see those bears marching with military precision, you're looking at the legacy of a perfectionist who refused to compromise. In the end, Bear's story isn't really about music or technology. It's about what happens when someone cares enough to get it exactly right. When someone looks at the way things are and says, "No, that's not good enough. I'll build it better myself." The Grateful Dead could have hired any sound man. There were plenty of competent engineers. They could have used any recording equipment, but they had Bear. And because they had Bear, they became better. We have those recordings because Bear refused to let them disappear. We have the Wall of Sound's influence echoing through every modern venue. We have the tape trading culture that kept the Dead's music alive. Starfinder Stanley works now to make sure people understand his father's contributions, releasing the Sonic journals so new generations can hear what Bear preserved, explaining that the bears aren't just cute merchandise. They're marching because Bear marched. Forward, always forward, toward better sound, better documentation, better everything. Never satisfied with good enough. The shows Bear recorded, the systems he built, the standards he set, those remain. Every time you go to a concert and the sound is clear and balanced. Every time you hear a vintage recording that shouldn't exist, but does. That's Bear's legacy. So the next time you see those bears, take a second. Look at how they're moving, high-stepping, purposeful, precise. Just like Owsley Bear Stanley, who changed everything and asked for nothing except that we get it exactly right.